Death Stranding 2 may be a more welcoming game than its predecessor, but it's a significantly worse Death Stranding game because of it. Now that may sound contradictory or a bit clickbaity, but it's not meant to be. If you truly loved the original Death Stranding, I hope you understand where I'm coming from. The first Death Stranding was a once-in-a-generation anomaly. It was divisive, meditative, and often punishing. But at its core, it was something profoundly beautiful, a vision of isolation, connection, the quiet labour of rebuilding a fractured world, an incredibly realised vision of what it means to be part of a collective struggle and how that brings people together. And then the pandemic happened, and suddenly its message felt more real than ever. But Death Stranding 2, for all its polish, spectacle, and quality of life improvements, loses something essential to the Death Stranding experience. It simplifies what once meant something. It replaces strain with spectacle, and in doing so, it strays from the very soul of what made the first game unforgettable. Now look, this isn't a video to hate bait. I'm here to have a genuine discussion about the compromises made in Death Stranding 2, why Kojima may have made those compromises, and how that impacts the overall Death Strandiness of Death Stranding. Look, the game still wows and mesmerizes, especially technologically. Kojima yet again proving his cinematography chops and audiophile credentials. His ability to frame a scene and wow you still remain, but as he wrestles with his movie director side and his game director side, things are just getting lost in the wash. The original Death Stranding dared to make walking a meaningful mechanic. It turned something mundane into something fraught with tension, weight, purpose. Every slip, every stumble down a rain-slicked mountain, it mattered. But more than all of that, Death Stranding was about us, players across the world silently building, sharing, and supporting each other. Every bridge you crossed, every zipline you used was someone else's labour. And that invisible collaboration, those kind of quiet acts of kindness, they were the heart of Kojima's vision. Now, Death Stranding 2 still captures some of the haunting solitude, climbing a mountain as Caroline Polachek's ethereal vocals drift through the wind. It's a magic only Kojima could conjure up. The core themes of connection, finding your place in a world or in a family, of trauma, they still linger here. But the systems that are a core support network of those ideas, they're dulled. In the first game, building infrastructure meant crawling past BTs with trembling hands to find materials that you would then bring to make your structures that would then help some invisible person on the other side of the world. In Death Stranding 2, you simply claim materials from a mine or facility, throw them in your car and move on. It's efficient, it's streamlined, but it just feels empty. If anything, Death Stranding 1 taught us that the collective struggle gives meaning to what we do. That has been completely taken away in Death Stranding 2. And sadly for me, streamlining undermines the meaning. Death Stranding 2 flattens the experience, literally and metaphorically. Vehicles glide across the terrain that once challenged your every step. Materials are abundant. Danger is minimal. Even the asynchronous multiplayer, once a quiet revelation, now just feels like an afterthought. Let me ask you a question about Death Stranding 2, and this is only relevant to players who played Death Stranding 1. How many times did you come across a structure and thank the heavens that somebody had built it in Death Stranding 2? Genuinely, for me, never. Never once. And that is a problem. And that's because the environments, though visually breathtaking, are mechanically sterile. Where are the sandstorms, the avalanches, the earthquakes that we were promised? That they tease in the game but never actually do anything or impact the gameplay in a meaningful way. The world now feels like a painted backdrop, not the character that it was in the first game. Traversal was kind of a puzzle in Death Stranding 1, part endurance test, part strategy. Now it's just getting from one cutscene to the next, quite frankly, and I couldn't shake this feeling in Death Stranding 2. The core part of the gameplay, the A to B, just feels like a procession now. A procession from cutscene to incredible cutscene. And as jaw-dropping as those are in places, the narrative behind them struggles under its own weight. Huge lore dumps bury emotional beat. Twists come not as revelations, but as convoluted conveniences. Regularly, information is hidden from the player or the player is straight up lied to, which isn't bad as kind of like a plot delivery mechanism at times. But when you put so many in, you just kind of lose your way. I don't agree, and I will never agree that a story that requires YouTube videos to explain even the kind of base twists or the base journey you went on in a story is a good story. And I know people will say it's Kojima, and Kojima can get away with it if emotional beats hit. And we're going to get into that in a minute, but they miss also in Death Stranding 2. But yeah, the message here, it's still about human connection, but the medium of that message, somehow just as confusing but less profound. But yeah, like I said, the cutscenes are astonishing, but the story they tell often isn't. Huge lore dumps balloon the narrative. Key information is hidden for the sake of plot twists that feel more M. Night Shyamalan, I can't say his name, than meaningful. The final payoff is just not great, and worse, makes some core emotional beats somewhat redundant. We're once again told that human connection matters, only now it's against the backdrop of automation, which just doesn't have the same feel to it. Now, one of the other key themes here is trauma and the cyclical nature of life and death, and for those who've experienced loss, especially of a child, those deeps should invoke strong emotions. I'm not going to delve too much into my personal loss, but just briefly, I had a deep loss of a young child very close to me about 7 years ago. And it still sits with me every day. I still think of her every day. And the story here should have made me cry many, many times. And it just didn't. And this is where Death Stranding 2, I think, gets it really wrong. Through all the wackiness that Kojima does in Death Stranding 1, the core theme landed. In Death Stranding 2, the core theme misses, throwing the bunch of wackiness and the long convoluted story, and you don't really have a catalyst driving you through the game. Tonally, it's all over the place. I mean, if you're talking about someone losing a child, a son, a partner, there just needs to be a tone, a kind of sense of decency about that subject matter, which is missing here. And also, look, I'm not a movie critic, I don't critique actors. I just feel like Norman Reedus, he doesn't pack that emotional punch. Like, did you really feel he was grieving outside of the first 20 minutes of the game? No, for me. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. Now, some will defend the changes as quality of life improvements, as many reviewers have, but convenience without consequence strips Death Stranding of its soul. If the journey isn't grueling, the connection isn't earned, and that is just, for me, the core of Death Stranding. It's kind of like playing a Dark Souls game with infinite healing. Technically easier, but completely missing the point. The original game resisted mainstream conventions. It was weird, it was slow, it trusted you to find meaning in motion. The sequel, by contrast, feels like it's trying to please everyone, and ends up pleasing fewer. Well, fewer people who love Death Stranding 1. And we're going to go into Kojima's comments that he made about him feeling the kind of test groups that were playing the game beforehand found the game, well, liked the game too much, and he didn't like that. But I found that to be a really odd comment considering what Death Stranding 2 ended up being. Combat has regressed to generic third-person fare, bullet sponge bosses with glowing weak spots. Well, one bullet but sponge boss with glowing weak spots. The second major boss is just pure spectacle, shallow in design, shoot, run, repeat. For a game that dances with surrealism and metaphor, there's just a lack of mechanics in the majority of the gameplay. The mechanics just feel shockingly lifeless. We mock games like Suicide Squad for having, weak points that you just shoot and the boss just dies, and yet when Kojima does it, he gets a free pass. That's just not something I'm willing to overlook. Even the best new mechanic in the game, well, what I thought was the best new mechanic was the capturing the BT mechanic, which is put so far in the back end of the game that it just feels like a wasted opportunity. Like, can you imagine capturing BTs from the start and then summoning them in fights? Would at least give something cool, something new to Death Stranding 2. And on that point, what on earth happened to Kojima's boss battles? Even Phantom Pain didn't have great boss battles. They've been awful for a really long time, bar one or two exceptions, which I know people will bring up as an example, but generally speaking across the board, I'd say like 80% of these boss battles are poor. And then going back to the tone of the game, Death Stranding 2 delivers some of the most cinematic, emotionally potent cutscenes in video game history. I want to give a particular shout out to the Rainy dialogue that happens between Rainy and Fragile when they're talking about Rainy's past and kind of when she's been chased by the villagers. Genuinely incredible. Swelling violins, angelic vocal, genuinely moved me. But these moments sit beside bizarre interludes that, while so Kojima, totally undercut the game's thematic gravitas. If you're going to talk about somebody losing a child, the cyclical nature of grief, it deserves more than these jarring tonal shifts. The wackiness, once charming, now feels a touch intrusive. There's a strange sense of deja vu to Death Stranding 2, as there can be with sequels sometimes, but it stands out here for a variety of reasons, and one of the main ones is because the core gameplay here is dull. Familiar characters, familiar twists, familiar bad guy, and yet the impact is diminished. Higgs returns, the BTs return, but with less mystery, less menace. The BT capturing mechanic, one of the game's few fresh ideas, arrives 40 plus hours in. By then, the tension is gone. The world once brimming with existential threat feels very safe. Even the terrain, so vital in the first game, now feels like filler. For all the talk before launch about making a game that's not for everyone, the irony is this feels designed for everyone. Simplified traversal, streamlined systems, big name actors, bigger spectacle. But where's the ambition? Where's the bite? Where's the originality? This doesn't feel like a sequel Kojima had to make. It feels like one he's made because everyone expected him to, or because an exec said, make us an easier Death Stranding 2 and we'll give you a 3-movie license. I don't know. Something just feels off about this whole experience. It's like, honestly, it's one of the least Kojima games I've played. Like I said at the start, Death Stranding 2 is not a failure. It's often beautiful, at times it's emotionally resonant, but it is also safe, overindulgent, and undercut by its own compromises. If Death Stranding was a mysterious message in a bottle, quiet, personal, and profound, then Death Stranding 2 is more like a corporate email, polished, marketable, but less heartfelt. In trying to evolve, Kojima may have abandoned the very people who understood him best. And I've not even touched on just how easy the game is, absolutely no resistance across the board beginning to end. And this impacts the game in many ways. First of all, after the first few porters and the first few bases I'd been to, I didn't want to level them up because they gave you stronger weapons and the game was already too easy. This then feeds back into the whole idea of Death Stranding is about collective struggle. If there's no struggle, it dulls the feeling of the game. It dulls the meaning of the game. Again, this comes back to my feeling that it just felt like a bit of a procession. What do you think? Has simplification ruined Kojima's vision in Death Stranding 2, or was it a necessary evolution? Is it better to have a more welcome experience to get more people on board the Death Stranding train? Let me know in the comments. And again, please don't come at me saying I think the game's crap or I don't get it. I do get it. I love Death Stranding 1. It's a game that sat with me for years after I finished it. But Death Stranding 2 will not do the same. And when I was trying to figure out why, these are the conclusions I came to. Let me know your thoughts about all the things I've said. If you leave a like and subscribe, it helps. I love talking about games. We may not agree or disagree on everything, but it's cool to talk about it. Peace. Take care, guys.